If you have an old Spyder paintball gun lying around that doesn't shoot, you have a few options. One, you can send it to a repair shop for $35 an hour. You can go on eBay to hunt down for parts. Or you can just go to Walmart and pick up a new one for $70. Luckily, for old Spyder paintball guns, most of the common problems can be fixed with a few generic parts for less than $5. Today I will be showing you how to repair a Spyder paintball gun with a bad E-trigger. To demonstrate this, I'll be using this Spyder Imagine. It doesn't shoot. What I mean by that is, if you turn on the E-trigger, cock the bolt, and try to fire, you will notice that there's a clicking sound, but the bolt doesn't strike. What's happening is the solenoid is firing, but something is going on inside the trigger. And we're going to open it up and diagnose the issue. So let's turn this off. Here's other tools you need. You need a clean surface, the gun itself, and the most likely issues that's causing the E-trigger to fail to strike is a bad capacitor. The replacement you need is something like this. The capacitance is 6800 microfarad. The voltage is 16 volts. You also need the dimensions to be exactly what's inside the trigger itself. It has a length of 30 millimeters and a width of 16 millimeters. You need to make sure the dimension of the capacitor you're getting is exactly 30 millimeters times 16 millimeters or less, or else you won't fit inside E-trigger and you have another problem in your hands. If you can see right here, this capacitor is actually 25 volts. That's actually okay. For capacitors, the voltage rating is the maximum voltage it can take without blowing off. So even though the capacitor in the trigger right now is 16 volts, a 25 volt one will work just as well. Therefore, when you look for a capacitor, get one that is 30 times 16 or less. Get one that is 16 volts or higher. But for capacitance, make sure you get exactly 6800 microfarads. Anything else won't work. Other items you need is the solder, the electric tape, a metric hex wrench set. The one you will be using today is the 3mm hex wrench. Or a 3mm hex bit, a screwdriver with a Phillips head, and of course the soldering kit. Now, if you don't have a soldering kit lying around your house, you should go buy one. It is very useful to have. And I picked up this kit, a 14-piece soldering kit, for less than $10 on eBay. You will pay yourself back for you. And finally, you also need a clean towel. Also nice to have, but not necessary for this. It's a Sharpie, a multimeter, and a can of air. But these are not absolutely necessary, so I'm going to put it aside. Alright, so you have a bad E-trigger. Before you start messing with it, you should probably check to make sure the problem is not actually in your bolt assembly. In another video, I show you how to clean and maintain your Spyder paintball gun. Go to that video, Follow instructions there to take out your board assembly. Double check if everything is fine here. If you can confirm that there is nothing wrong with the board assembly, then the only thing that will cause your gun to not strike, for your bolt to be stuck, is the trigger itself. So let's take out the trigger. While you could work on a trigger while your gun is fully assembled, I will advise you to take it out just to make it a little easier. To take it out, you're going to use a 3mm hex wrench or the 3mm bit to remove the screws right here and here. Don't remove this one. That's for your air system. You're also going to use the Phillips head to remove the screws right here and right here from the ASA. Then you just have the trigger itself. So let's do that. Alright. Make sure you don't lose the screws. If you do, you might as well just throw your gun away. If the hex bit doesn't work, the hex wrench will. It really depends on how tightly you assemble your gun last time, or whoever owned it before. Now, that was what I was going to mention. Because I had the bolt cock right here, by loosening the trigger, the bolt was allowed to strike. There. Remember, don't lose your screws. Let's put the rest of the gun away so we just work on the trigger. You need to remove these 3 screws to access the electric board of your e-trigger. Alright. Take out the strip. Make sure you don't lose these screws. Alright, so here's your solenoid that strikes. If you want, you can turn it on just to make sure that your solenoid is actually working. Notice how the shear is firing, but turns out it's just not firing hard enough for the bolt to strike. Let's turn this off again. You don't need to electrocute yourself. Inspect the overall e-trigger. If there's any dust or grime, clean it with your towel. I would like to remind you that don't use water ever to clean your paintball gun. If you use water and it gets inside your gun internals, for one, you will rust if you're lucky. Or two, you get into your electric components, your gun is fucked. Alright, so the solenoid looks fine. The board is more or less clean. Let's take off this battery right here. So when you work on a board, you won't electrocute yourself. And let's remove the board. Again, you'll be using a screwdriver with a Phillips head and take out these 2 screws. Don't lose them. Now, if you're wondering what this is, this goes here. Make sure you don't lose that also. Here. Alright, now you can just carefully take out the board on your gun. Alright. And here's the capacitor that's the culprit that's causing an issue. You know this capacitor is bad because this cap right here, the top of the capacitor, is bulging out. There are other signs of a bad capacitor is this cap actually blew up. And internals of the capacitor is actually oozing out to the gun. If any of those occur, those are signs that you need to replace the capacitor. Let me show you briefly how the capacitor is supposed to look like and what is actually going on right now. So here's the top of your capacitor. A good capacitor will be flat with a cross on top. This is the horizontal view of it. It should be flat. The broken capacitor on this gun actually looks like this. The center had bulged out. It's probably a good idea for you to double check with the capacitor you have right here. On your gun to make sure that you have a capacitor that is different, that your capacitor isn't different from what I quoted. Now, if you never solder anything in your life before, that's okay. Just be careful. It's probably a good idea for you to just look up a few more videos on basic instructions on how to solder your gun. I would probably go a little too fast for you. Alright. So, here is the back capacitor. Take a look. Here's your back capacitor. Carefully straighten it out. And one important thing you have to do is locate which is the negative end on the board and which is the positive end on the board. Right here. The way you can figure that out is look at the capacitor itself. And notice how on this side you have an arrow and it's pointed downwards, and it have a negative sign right here. This dash. This is to indicate that the negative side of the capacitor is on this end. And because of that, that means the negative side of the capacitor must go on this side of the board. Negative, negative right here. And to remind yourself which side do you want to connect it to, if you have a Sharpie lying around, just put a negative sign next to the negative connector. After you've done that, you should prep your solder. Alright, hopefully you have everything set up like this. You want to wet your sponge. Now what we need to do is to remove the solder from here in order to pull out the prongs. The way you do that is take the soldering iron and wet the sponge. Plug in the soldering iron, wait some time, and then start cleaning the soldering iron head. If you have rosin in your kit, you can also plunge your soldering iron into the rosin. It just makes it smells nice, mostly. Then you want to prep your soldering iron head. The way you do that is put some new solder onto the head, then wipe it away onto the sponge. Again, make sure the sponge you use has water in it to cool down the soldering iron. Now your soldering iron head is clean. This is important because you want to have maximum heat transfer going from iron to the board in order to melt the solder. Now to melt the solder, you press the soldering iron on the board. Until the solder melts. Then use this, which is a desoldering pump, to remove the solder that's sitting on the board. You need to do this a few times, possibly, to remove all the solder. Then melt the solder and just try to pull out the prong. There you go. One bad capacitor and the board. When you have a capacitor removed, it's a good idea to go back to the connectors hose and just try to get any remaining solder on the board, because if they can prevent you from spreading the capacitor wires. Do it. take your, yeah, that's more or less good enough. Also, you want to prep your new capacitor by wrapping some electric tape around each end. The reason for that is you do not, because it's a very confined space, there is a chance for the two wires to touch and you can short circuit the board. Just a very small strip of electrical tape. And wrap it around each end to insulate the two prongs from each other. Alright. Next, you want to bend the positive a little bit, so it's a little closer, until they can fit into the prongs. Hopefully you remember which end is the positive and which is the negative end. Right here I have marked the negative end with a Sharpie. Positive, positive, negative to negative. It's important before you solder everything back in for you to just test to make sure that you can still fit the capacitor. Back on the board, like this. When you do, and you can double check to make sure that the wires are insulated from each other, which means that any part that can potentially touch has been covered up with electrical tape. Now you want to make sure you want to solder the wires back in. To do that, wipe your soldering iron on your foam, which should still be wet. Put a tab of wherever that is. Now, very carefully take a strip of solder and melt it over the end. Now do the same you don't need to do too much, just enough for the connection to be made, and make sure it doesn't spill on each other, because the one thing you do not want to do is shorting these two connectors on the board. It's very messy to make. It's an easy mistake to make occasionally by melting too much solder, and it's a very challenging problem to fix. Alright, that looks good. If you have a multimeter, you can test to make sure the connection is good by putting a multimeter on resistance. 1K is good. Test it. Then check the prong you just connected with another part of wire. It's good. it's good. Just, you see this connection, hopefully you can see this connection, it's good, and then this connection is good. And double check to make sure there is no, it's not shorted. Alright, we are on the home stretch, so now you just need to put everything back together. Take these two screws and your Phillips screwdriver head, and screw back in the board. At this point, you can unplug your soldering iron and avoid getting burned like me. Alright, now it's a good time to deal with the wiring. Make sure everything is nice and tucked. Plug in a battery. Whether a trigger works. Turn it on, and assuming everything gone well, your capacitor is plugged in right, the positive when the positive, negative when negative, your wires is connected properly, and nothing is shorting. That sounds good. Alright, let's put the gun back together quickly. Remember the square screw, put it in here, the grip, probably a good time to turn off your trigger. Reinstall your grip. There are 3 screws. Hopefully you haven't lost them. If you haven't yet, time to turn off your soldering iron. Unplug it. You don't want to burn yourself. Now, take these hex screws and hex bit and put it back on the gun. There you go. Hopefully, replacing the capacitor will fix your E-trigger problem. If it doesn't, the last thing you can do is check your solenoid. Put a couple pennies behind your solenoid and basically hope for the best. If that doesn't, it's time to get a new gun. But if all goes well, your broken Spyder paintball gun is now as good as new. Just in case you think I'm lying to you, turn on the gun, pull back the trigger. There you go. Voila! One Spyder Imagine with each trigger that is working again. Good luck!